Welcome to Reimagine. This program is in defense of veterans, healing the wounds of injustice. It's a conversation about the capacity for growth and transformation among individuals who have served in the military. For veterans who experience injustice, whether that's racism, transphobia, sexual assault, my question is, how might advocacy, activism, and justice play a role in one's growth and self-knowledge? And how can mindfulness, technology, creativity facilitate change and provide a sense of safety and wholeness? Tonight is the final event in Reimagine's four-part series, Grief, Growth, and Justice. And I hope you will check out recordings of the series online. You'll get those links in a follow-up email from Reimagine along with this recording. I also invite you to join us for the closing night of our season of Grief, Growth, and Justice on June 9th. It's our monthly candlelight vigil to honor all that we've lost due to COVID and more. We've got two inspiring speakers, Reverend Emma Jordan Simpson and Pastor Corey Kennard, and both will explore how justice work can make spiritual growth possible. In the past, we focused primarily on breaking taboos surrounding death and dying, and that hasn't changed. We are continuing to spark those conversations on end of life, but what's different is that our conversations have broadened. We want to reimagine how we face the hard parts of life and transform that into meaningful action and growth. So we've been leaning into the theory and practice of post-traumatic growth. For those who have experienced trauma, research indicates that truly shattering experiences can cause debilitating anxiety as well as emotional and physical distress. We all know this as PTSD. And for those who don't know, I'm going to tell you a bit about PTG. There is another body of psychological research suggesting that we can also grow, learn, and transform from trauma, loss, and other adversities. And most of what I know is courtesy of our moderator, Dr. Richard Tedeschi, who has worked with veterans to develop research on PTG. I'm going to quickly go through some outcomes for post-traumatic growth so we can have more time for conversation. So, PTG outcomes include an increase in personal strength, that old adage, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Recognition of new possibilities and opportunities. We can shift old habits and patterns. Improved relationships with others. Adversity can forge new interactions with individuals, and a crisis can often strengthen bonds between people. Appreciating life. There's good stuff all around us that we may have overlooked previously. And finally, spiritual growth. Our core beliefs are shattered when we experience trauma. And in order to rebuild, we often ask those big existential questions. And if we're going to be talking about justice, I thought it would be helpful to have a definition because there are many. This one is courtesy of our partners at a nonprofit that we work with called Holistic Underground. Justice is a state of integrity and wholeness achieved through healing and transformation. When justice is present, we can trust that our safety and well-being are valued in a community or society. Now I'm going to stop our share. There we go. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Richard Tedeschi, who will introduce our guests. And each one will offer personal stories of adversity, justice, and growth. And you can read all of their complete bios in our event listing. Dr. Richard Tedeschi is Distinguished Chair of the Boulder Crest Institute for Post-Traumatic Growth and has been a mentor to all of us at Reimagine as we navigate how loss, grief, and other adversities are transformed in our minds, bodies, and souls. Rich, We're so grateful for your guidance and participation this spring, and also in our programming last fall. And now I'm just going to hand this off to you and our guests. Thank you so much, Rich.
Thank you, Andy. It's a privilege for me to be here tonight, and I think all of you joining us will learn a lot from listening to our guests, our three guests here tonight. And my role is to just help the conversation along as necessary, but I don't think that our three guests will need a lot of my help. They've got great things to say, and they enjoy interacting with one another. I've seen that already. So this is going to be a lot of fun. But we're talking about a topic that's not a lot of fun. We need to get a couple things out on the table, I think. I want to do that to get things started. So first of all, as Andy mentioned, our topic or our theme for tonight is In Defense of Veterans, Healing the Wounds of Injustice. So I want to talk about that a little bit first from the point of view of my work on post-traumatic growth. So what injustice is, how we can think about it, is a blow to our core beliefs that Andy just mentioned to you. And our core beliefs are a set of foundational assumptions that we carry throughout our lives about the kind of world we live in, the kind of people we are, what our future holds for us. These are so basic that we hardly ever examine them closely or call them into question, except when something happens in our lives which surprises us because it doesn't fit with our understanding of the kind of world we're in or who we are or where our life is going. So this core belief system is crucial to making us feel safe and secure and to helping us guide ourselves throughout our world, making our own decisions about how we proceed. And when it's challenged like this, it is very anxiety arousing, very disturbing, and it will require then some reconstruction. We can't go through life with any kind of comfort or sense of purpose without core beliefs. So we have to reconstruct them in the aftermath of certain kinds of events. And injustice can be shattering to our core belief system, especially if we have grown up thinking that justice is typical, or justice is possible, or justice is what we strive towards, and then we're faced with the fact that it's not working that way. So in the military psychology literature lately, there's been a lot of discussion of a concept called moral injury. And this is where people experience things either by witnessing or engaging in certain activities that are counter to their moral code. And of course, injustice can arise from this and vice versa. So moral injury and injustice are connected with one another, and injustices are injuries to us. They are very, very distressing, and they demand from us a deep reconsideration of what we believe about this world. Now, in this reconstruction process, there is possibility, though, as Andy was talking about. This reconstruction process allows us to start to think more clearly, more openly about how we want to live, and what kind of world we live in, and most importantly, what our mission or purpose is. Andy mentioned to us, for example, that one of the aspects of post-traumatic growth is spiritual and existential change. This is where we start to reconsider what we're supposed to do with our lives, what our purpose is, what's important for us to focus on and do with our time here on the earth. So this this reconstruction in the direction of a new sense of purpose often yields important changes in not only ourselves, but in the people around us, and maybe even the systems that we are in contact with. And so who we have here tonight are three people who have been exemplars of this process of change and challenging systems towards change based on their own experiences with trauma and injustice. It's prompted them on important missions, as they'll describe to you. And I hope that as we talk about this process that all of them have gone through to one degree or another in reconstructing their own core beliefs, dealing with their own moral injuries, and seeking justice in their own lives and also in the systems that they come in contact with, you will be inspired to maybe do some of the same things yourself, engage in some of these kinds of missions yourself. So what I want to do is help the discussion along by reflecting things back to this concept of healing the wounds of injustice by helping people define missions for themselves and having an important effect on their communities, whatever their community might be, so they can move that community more in the direction of morality, more in the direction of justice, and more in the direction of growth. So hopefully that will be a part of what you'll hear in our discussion tonight with our guests. So let me get that started by introducing our first guest. And our first guest, when we first discussed this process tonight among ourselves, I think we all agreed that Bridgette McCoy would be going first because she's been inspiring people for a long time who are working in this space of veterans justice. And so we're going to start with Bridgette, and she is the founder of Women Veterans Social Justice Network, which is a nationally recognized, diverse, and inclusive organization known for honoring past and present military service women and equipping them for advanced leadership in philanthropy, entrepreneurship, and civic engagement for personal economic expansion. So, Bridgette, I want to turn it over to you first so you can tell about your organization and also how your own personal experiences led to the development of this work and how it leans us towards the social justice that we find in the title of your organization.
Thank you so much for introducing me and for clearly articulating moral injury so that I don't have to try to read through my notes to make sure that I covered it. So the reason I started my organization, which wasn't an organization, it really was a community group that was centered on supporting women primarily in a private setting with accessing their benefits, whatever those benefits were, with a specific focus on the socioeconomic part of claims. And so I started the group out of my own frustration with being isolated, having experienced homelessness, and the root cause of the isolation and the homelessness was military sexual trauma. Now, for people who are familiar with military sexual trauma because you served in the military and you're a clinician, you have an understanding of that. You recognize that there's lots of people who get treated for the symptoms. But what happens on the other end of the socioeconomic part is the homelessness. Again, like I said, the lack of connectedness, and then being shunned by the military. Because when I first came into the space, You know, military sexual trauma was like Bruno. We didn't talk about it, and we didn't talk to Bruno, whoever that was that had sexual trauma in their experience. And so it made sense to me from my perspective that in order for, you know, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion to really be exemplified, we had to first get the first person narratives of anyone who served. So remove the barrier of only someone who has combat trauma or someone who had served outside the wire, but anyone who served in the military, having the opportunity to share their first person experience. And I felt that we could do that in multiple ways. One, of course, being digitally connected. Digital narratives, of course, is a lot of the space that I move in. But then also creating these opportunities for people to share their pictures of themselves being in the military, the experiences that they had, and then collecting those narratives and presenting those narratives from a civic perspective to, you know, congressmen and women, leaders in business, leaders in educational institutions, and leaders in you know, entrepreneurial spaces, because many times the narratives in any of these civilian spaces were, they were looking for the men who served in combat. And so that automatically shut people down, because if you didn't serve in combat and maybe you don't identify from a gender perspective as a man, then where do you fit? And so, you know, the whole idea was about creating space. And so using social media, technology, presentations, poetry, publishing, all of those things began to be this idea of like making sure that wherever there was a space, that the narratives of those who served was accurately represented from their first person experience and not from someone telling the story for them. And so I like to you know, quote Polly Murray a lot, but she talks about protest by typewriter. And so I talk about it from a perspective of bringing it to the 4.0 or to the multiverse, right? And so to me, Justice, our Jedi, that perspective is about interconnecting of arts and technology and supporting it by the historical and cultural aspects of the storytelling. And so it was again, it was important for me to bring that forward and then implement those strategies through, you know, evidence-based methods, like getting, you know, women, specifically women in the CNB suite at the creating our own table and then leading those tables, right? And then in philanthropy by, you know, again, being in leadership, not being, you know, just someone just, you know, standing there handing out buttons, but actually being the people making the decisions and creating, you know, creating change there. And then the socioeconomic part was key because women, a lot of us were not applying for our benefits, primarily because of fear that they wouldn't be heard, wouldn't be accepted. And a lot of those fears were well-founded because of the past experiences. And so getting women to get into that movement of, you know, I don't care if it was just a paperclip cut, file, if you were injured, it doesn't matter where it happened, file the claim, right? An appropriate claim so it can be adjudicated appropriately. And then the last thing was getting involved civically and running for office, supporting those who run for office and being appointed into office. And a lot of this stuff was done in a way, kind of a covert way, because most people who know me know I'm, you know, I smile, I say, take a picture. If it didn't happen, you know, we don't know it happened unless we have a picture. Come on, everybody, let's get these pictures. And they didn't realize that that was an act of protest. That was an act of like disruption, because there were no places where we were being seen. And so, of course, people could say, well, where are they? Where are they? We don't know where they are. And so I was like, well, here they are. I've got 1,000 pictures. Here they are. I have 8,000 pictures. Here they are. I have 20,000 pictures. And then everybody started doing similar things. And so I just want to make sure that we look at that as an act of disruption, because sometimes people will say, oh, people are vain because they take pictures. Oh, what does it matter if I take a picture? I don't want my picture to be seen. But we were working to dismantle that ideology of like not being seen, to being seen, and not just being seen, but being seen in positions of authority and leadership, and being the subject matter experts about our own causes and our own challenges. Because from the research and all of these other things, everyone was speaking for us. They were telling everyone what we were experiencing in the data and what we were experiencing through their narratives about us through their research. And so I wanted to change that. And so fast forward to kind of talk about like me being in the space now. You know, I had to learn how to realign my own identity and begin to fully walk in my experiences as having a veteran status, not so much being like firmly rooted in being a veteran, having a veteran status, and being a Black woman and a cyber feminist and a disabled person, and fully owning those identities, so that as I develop in my academics and in my personal life, then I can expand outside of the spaces of being a veteran, outside of the spaces of being an ex-military, and outside of the spaces of being an advocate. I most recently took a trip. I traveled back. I hadn't been back to Europe, and since the incidents that happened to me, the rapes and the sexual harassment. But I took a trip back to Europe, and I spent 4 days driving Audis through the Alps and through Italy. And I didn't talk not one time about being a veteran. I didn't talk one time about being an advocate, other than to greet other people who said they were veteran. I say I was a veteran as well. And it was liberating, right? And so I had an opportunity to kind of step outside of this space that had been molded, and enjoy the freedom of just being Bridgette. And so my hope is for those listening and watching that you'll begin to explore that experience as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Bridgette. Thank you for telling us how you've come to this important place with your mission, with your organization. And one of the things that I was struck by is how important it is to be seen and heard, so that you can tell your own story, unfiltered or uninterpreted by other people, but be able to tell your own story. And I have to say, I just want to tell you this, that when I started this work on post-traumatic growth, the first thing my colleague Lawrence Calhoun and I did was we went to trauma survivors and listened to their stories. We wanted them to tell us what happened and what their experiences were and how things changed for them. That's where we started, because we wanted to approach them like they are the experts on themselves. You talked about being the subject matter expert on yourself. That is so exactly the way we wanted to approach our work, so that we could understand, help them teach us about what we need to know about trauma and trauma response. And that's how we learn so much about what's possible and how people change in positive ways, because we listened to their stories and listened to what they told us. And that's what's made it so rewarding for us throughout this work, because so many people then come back and say, the stuff you're talking about? Yeah, I resonate with that. This is like what I went through. And I'm thinking, well, you know why? Because I'm just telling the stories of other people that told me. I don't know anything. I'm just saying what other people told me. And so it resonates. So I think what you've said about being your own subject matter expert and bringing that out into the world so it can be heard is so, so important. And that's part of what we're doing here today. Thank you. Okay, so our next guest tonight is Lindsay Church. And Lindsay is the executive director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. which is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to creating an equitable and just world for veterans of color, women, LGBTQ, and religious minorities. So, Lindsay, it's your turn to tell us about your experiences and how that led you onto the mission that you now have.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Bridgette, for telling your story, because I think it's important to understand how folks like myself got here by folks like Bridgette really paving the way and really doing some of the even earlier, harder work than we already do today. And it's, let me tell you, it's some days not easy. So thank you for having me today. I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to take you through a personal narrative here. Bridgette, you did an amazing job of pointing to the stats and things like that. I'm not as good at that. I'm just going to tell you my personal story, and hopefully it answers the question. But I was born into a military family. I am the child of a veteran who was the child of a veteran. Service was our family's business, even if we didn't know it. For us, despite serving during different eras and with different moral underpinnings, we joined to escape the generational poverty. I served in the Navy from 2008 to 2012. I was inspired after high school, where I watched as the Twin Towers fell and thousands of human beings lost their lives. I believe what happened on 9/11 was an injustice done to an innocent country, and that we are in need, that folks like myself needed to join the military in our country's pursuit to right the wrongs in the name of supporting our troops. Many of my views have changed, and hearing more stories and understanding more people's perspectives on the issue. But at the young age of 17 and a half, that was all I knew. My first attempt to join the Navy was actually in 2003, when I was just finishing up high school and our country was first headed into Iraq. I was ready to give up everything, up to and including my life, in service to my country. During my time in waiting, I came out as queer and knew that the military's don't ask, don't tell policy didn't want people like me. It wasn't until 5 years later that I voluntarily put myself in a closet so I could wear the uniform of the United States of America, a country that criminalized my mere existence and denied people like me the fundamental right to exist. When I joined in 2008, I enlisted as a cryptologic technician interpretive, which is a very fancy way of saying I was a linguist. Joining the military was like a shock to the system when I was 22 years old, in a serious relationship with a woman, and had been doing drag for 2 years. As soon as I left, I longed for home and the safety and comfort of my queerness. Serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell felt like being lost at sea without a life vest. I could go down a lot of rabbit holes about the many homophobic and transphobic things that were said both to me and about me and during my service, about many others, but I'll recap it with a few. So while I was in boot camp, I was told that it was that if I came here to find somebody to get in the racks with, I came to the wrong place. This was told to me after I was trying to survive pneumonia and tried to catch up on boot camp instructional materials in a very homophobic environment. When I got to the Defense Language Institute, here I was trying to learn another language and support my country, and it was that dyke doesn't belong in my Navy. When I got really good at what I was doing and I was getting ready to graduate, I was given a very healthy pep talk that if I wanted to be good at this, they could protect us, but it would come at the expense of me growing my hair out and finding a gay male boyfriend. The military failed me and millions of other LGBTQ service members who really just joined the military to serve our country and tried so desperately to do so proudly. They failed at every turn to keep us safe from sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual predators that used that policy to ensure that people like myself didn't have a voice, and that we knew that should we say anything, that our lives would be ruined. I served in a military that legally made me a criminal for only who I love. At the same time, as I was navigating all of this, I was also navigating disability. In my first year in the military, I was getting deep chest pain down my left arm only, which is never usually a good sign. I was seen down at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, and I was told that I needed surgery for an inverted sternum. I was born with a congenital birth defect that meant my sternum was inverted, and there were only 3.5 centimeters between the bottom of my sternum and my spine. I ended up having my first surgery at the age of 22 years old. That was complicated by a surgeon who didn't actually have the qualifications to do the surgery. and didn't ask for permission to do the surgery that he ended up doing. That resulted in what are now 9 surgeries, 55 days spent inpatient hospitalization, missing 36 inches of my ribs. I have no cartilage left in my chest, and I live with a spinal cord stimulator that controls my pain. I couldn't sue the military because there's this lovely policy called the Ferris Doctrine that pretty much protects the military from damn near everything, including killing us or us killing each other. There is a legal policy that actually makes it so the Department of Defense that can never be held to justice and to account. The Department of Defense is completely held immune to many of the things that they are actually very, very, very culpable and guilty of doing. In the military, it's really hard to see that your injustices are connected to each other. You feel in that moment like you are the only person in the world experiencing the injustice that you are experiencing, and they teach you to be quiet about it because you are complaining. And in fact, you are experiencing a deeply rooted injustice. You know they're there, but there's, you know that that these injustices are there, but you have very little understanding because you feel so small in relation to it all. You think your story is small and it's only you who are bothered by these problems. And in reality, there are many folks that you will find many years later that will tell you that you were never alone, but you just felt it. The system survives on this. It actually holds itself together through our silence and through our disconnectedness. It wasn't until years after service that I began to find any kind of healing. I struggled with social isolation. I drank a lot when I got out, and did whatever I could just to mask that pain and get through however I could just to survive it all. At the same time, I was trying very hard to get my life back in order and figure out what this next journey for me looked like. And so here I went and managed to find myself on a college campus, which was very foreign to me. I spent 2 years all by myself. I finally found the veteran community 2 years in, and knew and needed, when I get to grad school, I was going to have to find some people. I ended up working with student veterans, starting an department on campus called Student Veteran Life that still is in existence at the University of Washington. And so I found my home, quote, home, my first home. It wasn't a place that validated me as a human being. It very much didn't want to see people like me. It very much wanted me and my queerness to stay in the places that the military had kept my queerness. It wasn't until 2017 that I actually found my home and the place that I was meant to be. And that is where I am today. Minority Veterans of America. It's an organization that was created on a principle nature of intersectionality, recognizing that we as people have many identities that intersect with this veteran identity, and many of them are both minority and minoritized intentionally. And that through working together, we can fix and repair some of these injustices, and we can fight the system that made us all feel so alone. Minority Vets was started by me and one of my dear friends, who's a Korean American woman veteran who was also made to feel completely outside of the veteran community. We started during what I like to deem the greatest hits era of 2017, when the first Women's March was coming to fruition, the Muslim ban was in full effect, and the military trans ban was being unleashed on this nation. We started 12 days after the military trans ban because this was an opportunity for me, who had experienced Don't Ask, Don't Tell, to say absolutely not. I will not allow that injustice to stand, and I will not keep allowing for this community and this country to be harmed by these policies that already cause so many deep wounds in the community. And so I'm very proud of the work that we do and have the opportunity to fight injustice every day. I was on a call getting ready for tonight's call, and someone asked me, what am I going to talk about, and how can I possibly talk about healing from wounds as deep as what we as a community have endured? And the best explanation I can give you is this. Wounds have stages. The first is the traditional stage of a wound. It's where blood is everywhere. We've got all of the gruesome, dirty, nitty-gritty details of when you are first wounded. And that's the time that everybody's around, right? Like when you see somebody gets hurt, that's always the time that people show up. It's the part that we most know about. And it's the wound that will always be in our mind as what those wounds are. Then there's the scabbing part. And that's the part where this like the gnarliness starts, but it's this desperate attempt to cover what has happened and to cover that wound that we desperately need to cover out of self-preservation, because otherwise it will kill us. And it's what we do to make sense of it. It's our body's way of healing with it. And then there's the scar. That's the part that we learn to live with. And that's the part of the healing that, for better, for worse, will always be with you. It's the part that we learn to live with. And I don't necessarily call it healing. It will always be a scar. It will always be something that is a part of me. We're never going to heal from it. And let me tell you, I have more scars on my body than I care to count. And my body will never be the same because of the wounds that I've endured. It will always be different. It will always be me. And I learned to live with those wounds, as deep as they are, whether they be shallowest wounds you've ever had or the deepest wounds, but we heal in stages.
Thank you, Lindsay. You started by saying the way you're going to do it is by telling a story. And I think that's what captures people's attention. You tell anybody, you say, I want to tell you a story, and you've got their attention. So that's a great way to get the message out. And I was also struck by your discussion about the wounds, and I think of course you've in your story you've told about how many physical wounds you've endured, but there are the invisible wounds too, and so many people are suffering from invisible wounds, the scars that we can't see, but affect how they're able to interact with other people and how they interact with themselves in the world. So that's another part of the woundedness that I think we're talking about tonight that comes from injustice. So our third guest tonight is Lindsay Knapp. And Lindsay is the Executive Director of Combat Sexual Assault, a nonprofit organization that empowers survivors of military sexual trauma by helping them overcome barriers to obtaining justice. So we have two Lindsays here, but we need to have Lindsay Knapp on the screen now from Combat Sexual Assault.
I'm so honored to be here, and then to be, followed or get to follow Bridgette and Lindsay Church. Thank you so much for paving the way for the hard work that I'm doing now and that we're all doing. But as Rich said, I'm the Executive Director of Combat Sexual Assault. I am an attorney and an Army veteran. I am a survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence. I have been working with the military for more than 20 years. And my first sexual assault was around, maybe around 5 years of age. And then even more recently when somebody grabbed my ass at the grocery store. So I've been to court, I've been to trial, I have tried cases, I have been the witness on the witness stand, and then also watching my perpetrator go free and other perpetrators go free. So I am in the thick of it, and I am helping others in the thick of it. But as we're talking about like post-traumatic growth and how do you heal these wounds of injustice? So when people, quite often they ask me, why I do the type of work that I do. And I'm really always off put by this question, because what it feels like to me is that what they're really asking me is for me to help explain like what trauma I've experienced that has given me the drive and passion to do what I do. Or maybe like they're fishing for some kind of like software glitch in my brain that they're trying to exploit. Or maybe they ask themselves because they have experienced sexual assault and hope to somehow maybe distance themselves from me and my organization. Like, well, I'm not like that, so it won't happen to me. Or I'm different than you, so I'm protected and it won't happen to me or anyone that I know. Or tell me more so that I can convince myself that this isn't my problem and just a problem for other people, folks not like me. And I always wonder, like if everyone gets asked this question, like do cops, doctors, firefighters, accountants, software engineers get asked why they do what they do? But as much as I hate getting asked this question, I feel like it's a question that I should at least be able to answer for myself, even if I choose not to share that answer with anyone else. So why the hell do I do it? I mean, it's hard work. I meet every day with suffering. I hear traumatic stories, suicide attempts. I meet clients at the ER. I console them as the doctors address their injuries. Sometimes I even get the call that a client has died, sometimes at their own hand or at the hand of their attacker. So why do I do this? So for a long time, I just didn't have a good answer. I've got a ton of lived experiences that have certainly prepared me for this work, but I'm not sure that that's really why I do it. I would normally just say like, I start the story like, oh, I do this work for my survivors. I do it for them, or I do it for the folks in my life that have experienced this, or maybe even I do it for myself who's had to walk this path. But that never felt authentic. And as the words rolled off my tongue, I just immediately wanted to bring them back. And it felt like a lie, and it didn't really speak to my soul, and it didn't encompass the fire that I felt in the pit of my stomach. So I had to keep on digging and follow the breadcrumbs, walking through those dark caves of my mind and my soul with just like a little candle that only lights the next step in front of me. And that's all I can see. But I just take the next step, hoping that maybe it gets a little bit brighter and shows me the way. But while I'm at this point in my journey of life, I'm just crippled with anxiety and depression. I want to kill myself. I feel numb. And conversely, my husband is going through a very bright patch in his life, bless his heart, and is showering me incessantly with his love and support. And I hate it. And I hate that I hate it. And I don't yet understand why I can't receive his love. And so my tank is clearly on empty, and he's giving me exactly what I need, but I can't seem to feel anything. So I just go through the motions. I smoke pot, I drink, I do whatever it takes to take the edge off. And it works in the short term. But what I learned over time was that the key to unlocking my pain was through my body and through my breath. And so I began to explore things like yoga and meditation and began to control my breath, and then conversely able to control my mind. Because the ocean of my mind was like a hurricane with the winds blowing, the ships capsizing, complete and total chaos. But just below the surface of the waves, if you dive just a little bit deeper, the water was just a little calmer. And even a little deeper, quieter and calmer still. But by continuing to dive into the abyss of my mind, what I found was that only joy remained, and an overwhelming calmness and stillness persisted. And so every time I made it to this place, I would try to stay just a little bit longer. But I seem to like to swim back to the surface to see what's going on. And when I would just get pummeled by another wave. But as I get pummeled by wave after wave, I just began to ask myself, like, why do I stay here? Do I have to stay here? And so I would dive down and explore that a little more. So as I dived deeper and deeper, things got more clear. I was able to get my mind a little bit more still. And then when I was able to train my mind, not only was I happy, but I always knew what to do. And so then I was finally able to answer the question of why I do what I do. And it's because it's what they say in Sanskrit, it's my dharma, it's my highest calling. It is the thing that the universe has placed on my head for me to do. And as I'm going through this, all I'm learning is more about myself. I'm not doing it for my survivors or for the community at large. I am literally doing all of this work to polish my heart and be a better person. By focusing on the micro, I am having a tremendous impact on the macro. Because when I start thinking about how just effed up everything is, it's too overwhelming. But if I just think about how effed up I am, I can eat that elephant one bite at a time. But the ripple effects of that is how we're able to create this post-traumatic growth and how we're able to heal these wounds of injustice. And if I don't continue on this path, the universe is a little wild in the sense that it always pummels me back into doing this type of work, because all of our goals in life is to find this best self, to polish our hearts and to be that person. And just by being this person, we're able to help other people to do that. But we do it by doing it ourselves. So I don't actually help other people. I just help me, and then that helps them. They can see like where they're going, so to speak. So at the end of the day, I just surrendered and I gave up. But maybe not in the way that you think. I just gave up the idea that somehow my plans of life mattered. And I just surrendered to what was in front of me, did the task that the universe called me to do. I surrendered to my purpose and to my dharma. There's this author, Stephen Cope, and he has this great quote, and it says, if you bring forth what is within you, it will save you. And if you don't, it will destroy you. So my offering to the group is the more authentic of yourself you can be, the more free you can be.
Thank you, Lindsay. There's so much in there that you've said that we can reflect on. All these different themes that are so important about having a calling, a greater calling, and the kind of paradox of how that calling involves your own authenticity, being your authentic self, while at the same time a calling which enables that self to do something in the world that's of benefit and use. Otherwise, it's hollow. And so I think all three of you here embody those things where you obviously have a sense of calling because you're so enthusiastic about your work, which is so difficult at the same time. But you're devoted to it, and you love to do it, despite the fact that it takes a lot. Might take a lot out of you sometimes. But as all of you out there know who are doing important work and feel called, ultimately you end up, it's kind of the cliche that you end up getting more from your work than you feel like you're giving out sometimes. So thank you all for being here. And so before we get to a few minutes at the end where we'll have some time for you in the audience to ask some questions, make some comments, I wanted to get our three guests talking to one another in a way here for a little while. And so, we're focused here on the concept of justice. And I'm wondering whether you have seen the possibilities of justice. If you're seeing justice happening in the places you are traveling, or in this world now, it's so easy to become pessimistic about that possibility. So how do you see there to be justice, and how do you guard against pessimism?
I have an answer if my two besties don't want to jump in yet.
Okay.
So like when I get a client in the door, that's one of the first things we're going to do is define what justice looks like, because the statistics are that this person that assaulted them is going to be not guilty, right? It's never going to go to trial. Maybe it does. They're never going to be held accountable. So we start talking about what justice looks like for them. What will it take to make you feel whole? Because if you're hanging your hat on that, it's not that. But in that same breath, obviously I'm fighting for that. So it's like the analogy I like to use is that, we've got some folks shot on the battlefield, right? And the people that are coming into my office, it's like they've been shot. But yet we're asking them to pull other people off the battlefield and do all these great things. But really, they just need to heal. So when I get them in my office, I make them real. I'm like, hey, you're shot. You're not changing the system. Like the system's broke. You're not changing it. Once you heal, then we can change it together. And this is what folks like Lindsay Church and Bridget, this is what we're doing together, is we're healing our populations so that way we can come back now stronger and get this justice for the rest of us. But we're doing it by literally one human at a time. Like we're healing each human in our own unique ways, whether it be storytelling or putting up all of our signs and living our best life or going to court and yelling at the DOD. Like we're doing the thing, but it's healing these populations so that way now, we're tired and wounded. That's why we haven't gotten the justice we maybe hoped for, because we're not as healed as we need to be, at least in my view.
Bridget, do you want to jump in there? You have something. I see you. Go ahead. You
Well,
go first.
I love what Lindsay was saying, and I think, like I said before, which kind of piggybacks off of what she was talking about, is that process of like determining what is justice for that person. And so a lot back in the early days. So I'll say this: I started probably in 2006, and then I was online in 2009. And so a lot of the work that was being done was just like she was saying, one-to-one. You're just doing one person, trying to help them solve one problem. And I usually tell, even now, I tell people, give me 3 things, your top 3. Let me give you resources for 2 of them, and let's work on 1. And that's just the, and it's an ongoing process. And I've had to remove myself from that process primarily because it's such a big task, and send folks to bigger organizations to support the legal process, the claims process. Because when survivors come, just like myself, there's a tangle. And a lot of times it's like a chain when you have like a necklace and it's gotten tangled, trying to get all of the little knots out of it. It's a chain, you can wear it, it's beautiful, but when it's brought to you, it's got all of these tangles in it. And so we're just sitting there trying to pull each little piece out until we can get to the next thing, until we get this fully, complementary chain that's not tangled. And that's a long process. It's never ending. I'm still in counseling, right? We're talking 15 or so years. It doesn't end, right? So I think that justice looks different for each person. I don't necessarily want to know my perpetrator or what their situation is. For me, socioeconomically, it was important for me to be able to pay for my doctors and be able to get seen and treated appropriately, to make sure that I had a lifestyle where I wasn't on the streets, and to have a sense of community. For me, that was justice for me. But each one of the survivors that come through, it's going to be different for them. And so that's from a system perspective of like the institution, and then from the individual moral injury of like the community, how it impacted the individual by not accepting or retaliating against them when they did come forward. So I think all of those things kind of, jade how, what the person presents when they come and say, this is what's important to me. And what I found, once we tackle the socioeconomic part, interestingly enough, in the folks that I've worked with, the sense of justice shifts. Once that claim or that process where they've been said, what you said happened. Once those 2 things happen, the shift of like what is important begins to, it shifts. And I don't know if, Lindsay have something more to say about that, but yeah.
So I've been thinking about this while you wasn't talking, and I've never had justice. Let me start there. I think justice is a privilege that many of the communities that we exist in don't have the luxury of getting. And so there was a part of me a long time ago, like I was a survivor of sexual assault at the age of 2. I learned the injustice very early on, but at no point in my life did I learn justice, because justice in many of the instances it was just never real. And I think that many people from minority communities, from communities that are underrepresented or intentionally marginalized and oppressed, can say the same thing, that justice is not for me to say that I don't necessarily believe that justice is possible isn't a pessimistic thing. It's a very real thing. And for many people has become a survival tactic to getting through the many injustices that you endure throughout your life. And so I don't want to get held on justice and hold justice to the highest regard, because I hold accountability and change as the highest regard. Because what I can't get in justice from the Department of Defense, I will get in accountability from the Department of Defense. And I will get in change from the Department of Defense. And maybe that's not going to be justice for what happened to me. It's not going to be justice for what happened to you, Lindsay. It's not going to be justice for what happened to you, Bridget. But it's justice in the sense that I can tell myself that the next generation of service member will not have to endure the same stuff that I did, as much as that is possible at healing. That is what it is. Accountability, and it's change, and it's maybe closure if you're lucky. Closure is scarring and getting used to. And I don't know that you ever really close that door, because injustice is injustice. But I just want to be really careful that, like, we don't put justice at the highest pivotal, because that's not achievable for many people in this world.
So that brings me to ask another question then, and that is, each of you is working for change in some fashion or another. So could you tell our audience some of the change that you are seeing, and maybe some examples to things that may be hidden from a lot of people, but that you can see from your perspective?
Bridget, I think you're the person that needs to answer this first, because you've been, I think, the generational thing, right? I think if we start back to where you started in this fight, I think maybe we can piece together some changes that have happened.
There's been so much. I mean, and this is going to sound weird, because it's like I'm saying, like, yay, there's been so much. But it's because there was so much that was wrong and still is wrong, that there's so much. So simple things like, where your body was placed in the rooms when you get a pap smear and at the VA, those are things that were changed. Laws related to, military sexual trauma. Just now, that was passed about harassment being added to the UCMJ. So it's like we almost need a timeline to start. But for me, the biggest thing was culture. I didn't want to be called a victim. Going on the news and talking to people, I felt it was important to change the language. For me, linguistically, I feel like that our brains, follow what we say into the behaviors that we do, and so I felt like we needed to change the language from being female, to women, from being victims to survivors. And so when I began to see things like brochures at the VA and at nonprofits change, how people spoke to us in spaces instead of shunning us, welcoming us and honoring us for our service, even if we did have some experiences that were not traditionally thought of as military. Like those were the things that I felt were important. Giving military professionals an opportunity to have Facebook pages, like that at one time was a thing. You could not have social media and be in the military. It was like a UCMJ offense. You can't charge a rapist, but you can put somebody out of the military for having Facebook or social media. So it's like all of these little different weird things that didn't make sense. We're starting to see it narrow, and even talking about being a Black woman. Like when I first came into this space as a survivor, it was I was shunned because I said I'm a Black woman and a survivor of sexual assault. It's like, no, you're just a survivor. And I was like, I have multiple identities. Why can't I express all of them? And so these are just some of the things. And so I'm just kind of talking about the cultural part, and maybe someone else can talk about the legal and the others.
I'm not going to talk about legal, but I'm going to tell you about the thing that I think has changed the most. And you all can tell me if I'm wrong, because it's always subjective. I think the one thing that has changed the most is our power, our community and collective power. I think between many generations of service members coming back, many people had this idea that a veteran was a very specific thing, right? And if you close your eyes, you almost always see the same high and tight white dude that's really like wound up and like might as well still be wearing a military uniform, but like that's like the military veteran that so many people have seen. And they're like, I think if there was ever a justice for me, it was finding each other. It was finding those people to come together. And like, for me, I'm an organizer. And so I heal through collective action. I heal through community finding its power and finding its voice and saying, absolutely not anymore. I will not keep doing this. And Bridgette, you are proof positive that this has changed, because I see the next generation and Lindsay sees the next generation. I see people on this call. Hi, Maria, I see you. Like, you are a person that I love to see, because like folks like Maria are the reason like that we keep doing this, and the folks that are coming into this movement that will take the next generation. It's the community and collective action that we have harnessed blood, sweat, and tears, and every bit of it has been worth it, because we have moved the needle on many issues. Like we could sit here and talk change, like, you know, policies that have changed all day long, but our power is the one thing that is the most substantive change in generations, is that we have said no more, and there's space for everybody and all of your identities. Like, Bridgette, I think even, maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, in 2020, you could barely say that you were a Black woman survivor. I remember in the Justice for Vanessa Guillen groups, and many people were like, you cannot talk about being a Black woman here. Vanessa Guillen was Latinx. Like, we have all of these things. And so like we have taken as a collective whole, so there's space for everybody. Your identities belong here. They matter. They count in the data, and they show this whole picture, and we're not willing to let it go anymore.
Yeah, and then I just to add on to that, you know, after that foundation is laid, then we can, like y'all have set, so we can spike with policy, right, and the legislation and the legal stuff. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying, the minority is trying to take back some power from the majority, and we just can't do that, right? But we can if we're able to tell each other's stories, right, and then community organize, and then build this beautiful tapestry to then where it's like, all right, I got you. So thank you, Lindsay and Bridgette, for setting me up so I can spike it to them.
Okay, so we've got a community in this room here of a lot of other people. So we want to give that community a chance to interact with you, asking you some questions or making some comments. I'm sure that many of the things you've said have generated a lot of thought and a lot of feeling. So I want to make sure that the community out there joins this community and gets a chance to interact with you. So if you want to join in.
Sorry,
yes.
I wanted to suggest that in the spirit of first person narratives, if folks want to unmute and ask their questions, if they've posted them in the chat already, or ask them directly to our audience rather than use the chat, feel free to unmute and ask
Yes.
our speakers. Like, for example, Connie, you had a great question in the chat. If you want to ask that directly.
Sure. Good
Yes.
afternoon, everyone. I am Connie Baptiste, and I also work side by side with Bridgette. And my question, and it's not so much for an answer, but more thought-provoking. With the current fight to overturn Roe versus Wade, how do you see it impacting how we advocate on behalf of MST survivors? And do you think it will further, I typed dramatize, but I meant traumatize survivors? I know that we are going to have to get in the fight to make a difference, but how do you guys see the everyday average person being engaged in this? And how do we bridge the conversation to get people talking about this?
Would you like me to answer? I'm like, how about this keep abortion legal sign back here? That's a really good question. And I think the second part of your answer, which is how does the average typical person get involved? follow people that are already involved, organizations that are on the front lines fighting for this every single day. How is this going to disproportionately impact MST survivors? 100%. One, rape and sexual assault are a military hazard of duty, and we've just accepted that this is literally the occupational hazard that service members will pay. And we know that as a result of rape and sexual assault is a largely unwanted pregnancy. Like that these two things are we cannot deny that they are happening, and they are happening at the same time. And to deny that service members need access to critical abortion care is to completely turn a blind eye to the fact that like what is happening in these states that don't have access is life-threatening, life-changing. There are people literally trying to leave Texas mid-miscarriage to go to New Mexico, and are because people in Texas are afraid of miscarriage management. That's that's where we are at as a country. That's where we are at as a community of birthing human beings. And so we 100% need to get in this fight, whether we like it or not, because abortion is 100% about the troops. And so the average person, one, follow the organizations that are doing the work. There aren't very many veteran organizations, let me tell you. There's probably 4 that are actually fighting for Roe v. Wade outside of the individuals that are part of the organization. So find those 4, join them, support them, lend your voice, organize with us, show up to rallies, show up to protests, call your members of Congress, call members of the House Armed Services Committee. Every single one of them is their the service members are their constituents. Call the Senate Armed Service Committee if they don't want to listen to you. Literally do not stop, because you know the one thing a service member cannot do, advocate for themselves. And so the one, like, we have to remember in the fight for abortion, the same fight that we had under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the same fight that for MST, any recognition at all, service members don't have a voice, despite the fact that they are fighting for ours every single day. So I think that's like the one thing if you do nothing else, it's don't forget that service members are literally losing their lives here in the States for no good reason. And that it's our job and our responsibility to fight for a better future for them, because they're fighting for our actual future.
Any other comments on that?
The topic I get very mad about.
Yes, you've done well.
Also, let me make the comment that my 81-year-old mother talked to me about this. And she said, what is going on? What should we do? And we sat down and had a conversation. And then she asked me, okay, pull up the people who are running for office in this small town that we're from, and let me see who is pro what we need to do. And I was like, oh my God, I never thought that at 81, you would be wanting to still be engaged in the fight. But again, we're forgetting those people who still have a voice and who still vote.
And we need to vote like their lives depend on it, because they do.
It does.
Yeah, it does. I was going to say, yes, it does.
Okay, I think, Brad, did you have a question?
Oh, I did. Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for being part of this experience and creating such a powerful educational experience for all of us in the audience who haven't necessarily heard stories like this before. I'm curious, it seems like, and I could be misreading the situation, but it feels like you all have a very natural affinity for one another in this group. And I'm wondering if there are structures in place for you, like how have you met each other? Are there structures in place for you to interact and I don't know, just and amplify one another's work, or just in personal settings, structures for you to continue connecting with this group? Because I find you all so powerful, and your voices together just feel like they can move mountains. And I know they already are.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Brad. If I can say this, and I've been in this community for a while, and I can say there's maybe on my one hand, there are leaders in leadership who are collaborative. And sometimes people mistake collaboration for Like, you come here, do what I want you to do, and set aside what you're doing until I don't need you anymore as collaboration. But I will say that because of the panel that we have here, I can say Lindsay and Lindsay are not like that at all. I can tell you for sure, Lindsay has always, if I'm not on something, she sends me a message and says, do you know about it? And I'll be like, yeah, but I can't participate, or yes, let me figure out how to get things working. And so you have to start with a person who has either experienced probably a level of trauma and of healing where there's trust. And that trust, even if it's like a tiny bit, is enough to connect because of the shared experience and the trust that we have to work together, or I want to work with someone else to get things done. And not everybody's like that. There are some people who are completely, this is their mission, this is what they're doing, and they are the one, and they're the only one, and they don't want anybody else in that space with them. I've been collaborative. Like I said, Lindsay's been collaborative since day one. And so I think some of it is temperament as well. I think it is a part of it. I think I've always been a convener. I always want people to participate. I always want to enjoy other people having a good time. So it's kind of, even though this is like the opposite of that, in that we're working hard, we work together, we solve problems, and we punt it, to the person who's the best, right? Like in basketball, I'm not going to take a shot if I can't shoot a 3-pointer. I'm not taking the ball. I'm handing it to someone else. And so I think those things are key. But I also think that it's again, some of our shared experiences with identity is the other part. I think people who are deeply one thing or another don't find the need to connect with other people because they already feel like they've mastered this, something. And when your identity is kind of, smatterings of other things, you feel it intersectional. You feel more intersectional in the way that you connect with people. So I don't know if that kind of answered it. Someone else can take it and answer it maybe more succinctly, but that's what I was thinking with the initial question.
Girl, I can't follow that. Good job. High five.
The only thing that I'll say is that I think military strategy taught us something, and that's you'll find each other. There was like a whole underground queer network of service members that like we couldn't tell each other that we were gay as the day is long, but I always looked like this, so like there was no hiding. But we found each other, and there was like an unspoken code among people that you vibe with, like that you can create community with. And like Bridget, I think I'm very similar to you, that like I work with a lot of people. I don't trust everybody. And so I'm the person that like I connect with people through organizing, we started this organization with 5 people in my living room, and I said, everybody go out and find 5 people. And that's how our coordinated networks always grew. We set up infrastructures, Slack channels, Facebook groups, Bridget, like the original of the like women's who served, like you created that earlier on in the Facebook journey. But like finding and creating these kind of tools for ourselves. But like from the core of it all, like I think people who are genuinely in this, not for themselves, you find each other. Like I think almost anybody who's ever met me would probably say the same thing. I don't give a shit what happens to me. All I care about is what happens to my community, finding all of the other people that feel that same way. And I think Lindsay and Bridget are those people that like, we don't care what happens to us. Like, are we making an impact? Are we making the world better? Are we making sure our community has more space? And are we doing everything that we can to live our morals and values as well as we can? And finding everybody else in this journey that we can, like, that's how we get connected to each other. And that's how we found each other, is like, it doesn't take a long time to sort out the real ones. Like, it does not take long at all. Like sometimes you will hop on a call and be like, that is not the real one. And it's like a group call and you just self-select out. But like, that's how, like, trial and error, but really that's how we found each other, is to find and sort out it through all these personalities and the people like that haven't quite done their healing yet. And like, to find that core group that can hold it all together, because Bridgette is a convener and so is Lindsay. Like, that's how we got started. That's how our organizations and our groups got started, is by just bringing together the real ones.
And you can too out there, people. Find your people. Be your most authentic self. That's how you do it.
Just be yourself in all of your weird glory, and people
Yes.
will love you.
Yeah. And I was going to add to what Lindsay was saying. In the early days, there was only like maybe 2 or 3 groups, and I was one of those groups, and we had a super secret group, and it kept getting bombarded. And I thought maybe I'll make a bigger group that's like everybody can get to it, and it kept growing exponentially. Like every week, it was like it went from like 80 to 100, from 100 to 200, from 200 to 400 to 400, and it just kept growing. And then the connecting began. People kept saying, go to Bridgette, she knows the answer. I didn't always know the answer, but I always knew like somebody who could maybe give me the answer, or someone who could find me the answer. And so most of the people online are industrious. I mean, like, we were all playing video games at first. That was really kind of how we connected. We found each other because we all like to play video games. But then that created this other community where people started saying, you know, this is what I experienced. And one of the other changes, if I could say this, and this is, I don't know if this will resonate with you all, was that when I first came on Facebook and social media, all of the survivors had like strange names. They didn't have like Bridgette McCoy. They had like, you know, Rainbow Happiness, or, you know, Kitten Love, or whatever, and like a picture of a kitten or a picture of a rainbow or something like that. And I think probably around 2012 or 13, many of the people started coming out and saying who they were, right? And putting their picture up. And this was before Facebook made you do it. And then the next step was people were going online, and they were the Me Too movement during that time. People were coming online and saying that they had experienced sexual assault or harassment and naming their perpetrator. And when I would tell people this, they were like, no. If they're in the military, they would never do that. And I'd be like, here's this thread of like 400 people saying this is what happened. And through that, all of the connections really started to, you know, amalgamize, or if that's the right word. And more people became active. Before, it was just a simple, you know, like I say, their physical presence was a disruptive action. But then people began to become a disruptive action of like marching and going forward around the same time Lindsay was talking about. So I wanted to give that as well.
Well, I am afraid that we are needing to wrap this up. I got a message from Andy. He's the bad guy on this. So, but you have had such a wonderful discussion here, and there would be a whole lot more that we can do. But thank you for coming tonight, and thank everybody for attending and listening in. And I hope that this will inspire you to do some good work out there. Andy?
I want to thank you, Rich, for being our convener. For being our wonderful synthesizer of all this information, of all of these stories. I mentioned before everyone joined the call that we had a previous event on grief, how we can learn about grief through superheroes. And it was a great panel. And I feel like I have 3 superheroes here, but they're heroic for different reasons. I think they're heroic in part because of their spirit of collaboration, because of their spirit of community. And that's what inspires me. So thank you for joining us. And I want to encourage everyone to continue transforming and learning and growing. Please attend Reimagine events. We have a lovely community here as well. And you can check out what's rest of the Grief, Growth, and Justice season. June 9th, join us for our Candlelight Vigil with Corey Kennard and Reverend Emma from Auburn Seminary. It's going to be fantastic. And I encourage you also to create your own events on Reimagine's platform. Only what I do and my colleague Dara does as programmers for Reimagine, that's only really a small percentage of all the programming that you see on our schedule. It's community generated, so consider that. And also consider donating to Reimagine if you haven't. So I put links in the chat. You'll get a follow-up with a recording, resources, and I think that's it.
Andy, one thing, Andy, I mean, I can't, you know, just to say, and I work for Reimagine, so I feel okay about chiming in and saying this, but
Well, you don't just work for Reimagine, Brad. You're the founder and executive director.
okay, yeah, okay, that's true. But I just see this question coming up from Andrea, Born to Free. And I just feel like, you know, I know if you have to go, I understand if everyone has to take off, but I just feel like this is such an important question. And I wouldn't want to leave Andrea. She says, for those of us who are not yet real ones, and we have not gotten to that level of trust, how do we start afraid? And I wouldn't want to leave Andrea hanging, or Andrea, I apologize if I'm not saying your name correctly, but I just feel like, you know, I think it's such a scary question. And I, if anyone's willing to, if any of you are willing to stay on and answer that question, I know we're kind of at time. I think that would be really wonderful.
Can I answer real quick? And I think I have my, you all can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think you're ever not afraid. I think I'm just as afraid as you are right now, always, literally every turn. And being afraid is everything. I think that what makes you a real one. It's the person that walks into the fight and literally doesn't know anything from anything, that they are like, that they even should be afraid, or even like walking into that fight walks in with arrogance, like that you are even asking the question, how do I be a real one if I'm afraid? Like you are a real one. You are the one. And so Bridget and I both dropped our email addresses. Find us. I think you probably are more real than you think you are.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. And I think that's just fabulous.
Thank you again, everyone. And I wish you all a beautiful evening. Take good care.
Thanks for having us.